The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Aye, 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 aye. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return.
We good? Welcome. Thank you for coming. I know that you're getting drinks and stuff like that. You can take your time. My name's Daniel. I'm a member of TAM Integration. Hi. Hi. So what we do is we do events like this, right? We do some of these, and we hold integration circles and do integration coaching and things like that. Most of you probably know what that is, but it's sort of grounded in, it's grounded sort of in the understanding or perhaps the belief that our journeys are sacred, right? And whether our journeys start off being recreational, right? Or whether our journeys have started off being medical. There's a lot of amazing medical work that's happening now, right? That people are becoming aware of and people are getting to benefit from that, or other reasons. Who knows how you ended up. But throughout all of that, there's sort of this consensus that there's this sort of like spiritual evolution that's happening in this sort of sacred journey. And once we have sort of taken the helicopter ride to the mountain, and then we realize that we have to then climb it ourselves, it's nice to understand that we don't have to do that alone, right? That we can literally, what does Ram Dass say? We're all walking each other home. And so the fact that you're here makes me feel like you agree with that and that you want to walk hand in hand with the people in this room and in the wider community. So I thank you for that. I thank you for your interest and your care and for making the time. I'm sure that there's something great on TV you could be watching, and you chose to be here, and that's very, very sweet. Our guest is an old friend. I think we met in 2012, 2011, right after he made his documentary, Aya Awakenings, which was a very enjoyable kind of romp through various states of consciousness and the ways that they are being explored and documented and studied. And I really enjoyed it. And then, we've got to, have a relationship that's built over time. And you've done amazing things in that time. You've started Shamans of the Global Village. You're working with the World Bufo Conference. One of the things that I was very impressed with was hearing that they are working on, and we'll talk about this more, but I want to punctuate it, the kind of practitioner guidelines. What does it look like to offer medicines to each other, again, safely and with care? And so the fact that you're working on that, I think speaks volumes for your character. And so if it's possible for you to really open your hearts while at the same time creating a real big raucous round of applause for Rak Razam. Thanks for coming.
Wow. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
We're going to look at each other. We're going to look at the audience here.
Do you have a sore neck?
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay, he can go back and forth.
Yeah.
What did I leave out? What are you up to?
Interesting. You might mention that. I'm into consciousness, and I guess my career as a media maker has given me an opportunity and a perspective on two things. It's like there's an in-breath and there's an out-breath. And the in-breath is having experiences of not just altered consciousness, but like you were saying at the start in the introduction, of these spiritual journeys, of these encounters with ourself, but our deeper self. And then as part of that, thinking about how I can contribute back. You know, Joseph Campbell has this very archetypal arc of the hero's journey, which I used in my book, Higher Awakenings, which was then in the film. And there's the first thing's the departure from the known world. And then there's the initiation or the peak experience or that point of contact. And then the third thing is the return and bringing something of value back to the community and to the tribe. So all, in my own way, I'm at the coalface and having experiences of a spiritual nature, and then looking at ways I can communicate that to people and to assist in people's own journey, and to know that there are others out there who are also going through the same thing or different variations of the same thing. And it's a collective journey. How's that?
That's fantastic. What does it look like?
What does what look like?
Because that's very abstract, and I get it, and I think folks get it, that and I also sort of feel like we're all at some point end up in all phases of that at once. I often feel like there's an initiation and then a returning and a call sort of at different levels. It's like I'm constantly kind of growing, like I'm constantly being called to the next project or the next state of being or the next emanation of who I want to be in the world. So with that said, what does that work look like? Like if we were going to watch you in 3-dimensionals and in time and space, what does it look like? All of that stuff that you just said.
To answer that, I'm going to go back a bit, right? So where does the spiritual journey begin? I mean, it's always there, but we need sometimes the capacity to feel that or to have context for that. So a lot of my spiritual journey has been a psychedelic journey. And you were mentioning recreational experiences before. I mean, recreation is great in one level. I mean, the original Greek ecstasis means to connect to the divine. The ecstasy is the divine force. And a lot of the initiatory stages of our development and my development have been with LSD, in my early years. But there was always this connection with something bigger, and that expanded consciousness and that awareness that parlayed into an appreciation and a contact with the plant medicines. And I actually remember that transition around, the early noughts, for me, around 2003, 4, 5, of seeing everyone or a lot of people in my community in Australia, in the electronic music community, the outdoor festival scene, the early adopters starting to get into ayahuasca. And ayahuasca has reached out, as a plant medicine from Gaia, I believe, and representing that healing energy and connecting us back to the web of life. And I've seen the way, for me personally and for others, that these medicines come into our lives and anchor that capacity to be aware of the spiritual journey, to move away from the recreational into the spiritual domain, and to be in that ongoing process of working on ourselves, as you mentioned. And then in my own journey, of like a decade or more with ayahuasca, this beautiful gift called 5-MeO entered my life, which is what I think we're going to talk about tonight a little bit more. The first time I experienced 5-MeO was actually a week into my Virgin trip down to Peru in 2006, which was originally to do a a short article on ayahuasca and the role of the shaman. And that became the book Higher Awakenings and later the film. A week into my my first journey to Peru, in the jungle, I'd done 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, which essentially were cleansing and revealing and just preparing the vessel. I encountered 5-MeO DMT from a gringo shaman called Ron Wheelock and Dr. Juan Acosta, who is in the audience here tonight, who was doing these pretty renegade neuroscientist experiments with an EEG 19-channel head cap wired up to a computer. And Ron was serving, at the time, the legal medicine of 5-MeO DMT. And it was mind-blowing and life-changing. And I don't know if I was prepared for that. I mean, ayahuasca is one thing. There's a stepping stone and a gradation of the medicines and of the dimensionality they reveal. Just indulge me a little bit. I just want to describe it a little bit. So really not expecting the experience. I think in around 1999, I first did NN-DMT, which I was a big Terence McKenna fan and was really, you know, Terence pretty much single-handedly brought in the awareness culturally of smokable NN-DMT and of ayahuasca as well, and helped till the soil and get the seedbed ready for that cultural taking up of these medicines. But Terence didn't really talk about 5-MeO DMT much, right? It's very ego-dissolving. Well, let's describe 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah, what's that like?
It's like everything.
Everything's my favorite.
I know. It's like everything in one. So 5-MeO DMT is it's produced in the human organism. It's believed to be produced in the lungs and the cerebrospinal fluid, as well as NN-dimethyltryptamine, 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine. The human organism secretes these substances called tryptamines, which are very fundamental to consciousness itself. So there's certain tribes in the Amazon which still practice these darkness rituals, where if a human being is in total darkness for 10 or more days, some shamans in Mexico do this, and Mantak Chia runs darkness retreats in Thailand as well. And something very curious happens to the human organism. So in our skin pigment, we have melatonin or melatonin, which is a tryptamine, and it helps set day-night rhythm, that sense of the biorhythms. It travels down the serotonin pathways. After a few days of total darkness, the melatonin leaves the system, and then tryptamines naturally aggregate. They build up to a point where the brain starts to release or secrete pinealine, which is another tryptamine. It acts a little bit like an MAO inhibitor, like with ayahuasca, or a lubricant to then allow the natural cascade and flow of 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine or 5-MeO into the brain, into the consciousness. That happens around day 6, 7, 8. After that, there's that peak. The 5-MeO experience, well, how to describe this? It's been described as the white light, the tunnel, the sense of source consciousness, that sense of the numinous, that sense of home, that thing that is perhaps beyond the mind to comprehend or to even encapsulate, but that thing which the heart already knows. Before the 20th century, essentially, when we started to have electromagnetic frequencies and degraded food diets and different systems in place that start to really degrade our ability to connect to what we have within us, mystics all through history reported the 5-MeO experience, essentially. Didn't have the language for it to call it 5-MeO at the time. There's a famous book called Cosmic Consciousness by William Morris Buck, which came out in 1900. It maps throughout history the Jesuses and the Buddhas, the William Blakes, all the mystics and saints who have that experience of expanded or cosmic consciousness, which is a few steps up from baseline consciousness or the collective unconscious, or that feeling of expansion and oneness, that feeling of unity. And it's a feeling. It's not something that the mind can apprehend or know in itself. It's definitely a feeling. Sometimes it seems to me, to go back in our jumping around to 2006 when I first experienced 5-MeO. It's like being shot out of a cannon. What is that? There's that quote in the film. It's like load universe at brain, aim at brain, fire. And there's this sense of everything. And it's like the poet Rumi says, you know, the drop becomes the ocean. And our individual consciousness, I believe from my experiences with this medicine, we're just one frequency, or our intellect and our mind is more than what we think it is. And our ability to comprehend is something that we open to, that we connect to, that we have the capacity within us to remember this feeling of unity. It's not something that the intellect can hold. In fact, the intellect probably is the filter which stops us from being in that expanded consciousness all the time. And now over to Daniel.
Well, I stopped you there because I'm not sure if I think it's the intellect, but it's the way the ego attaches to the intellect, right? Because it's one thing to say, you know, kombucha, and then there's another to be like, my kombucha. Does that make sense? What do you think of that? What do you think about the sense of self?
I freeform this because I come at this as a writer and as a media maker and as an intuitive. And you're right. I mean, if we say the intellect or the ego, I mean, there's intellectualism, there's knowledge, there's that level of data, let's say, right? And the egoic structure, I think, is probably, it's like an iceberg, right? It's 9/10 of it are under the surface. It's deeper than we think it is. So the ego is not just something that means you're egotistical. It's not just something that's wrong. It's a program that is running on the operating system. But the program thinks it is the operating system. That's the differentiation I'd like to make. It's like, it's the busyness of the thoughts. So you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, but I've been led to a lot of the Sanskrit and the Vedic maps of consciousness through my experiences with 5-MeO.
Can I give you a word, Sanskrit word?
Yeah.
It's ahankar. And ahankar, anybody know this word? Sanskrit scholars? Nice. It literally means I maker. Right? And so the yogis, right? We were talking last time when we were hanging out in the park, we were talking about the Yoga Sutras, right? And then often in the Yoga Sutras, you know, they talk about how God becomes man, you know, or this is, you know, Sankhya philosophy, how God becomes man, and the various sorts of functions of the mind. And so there's just sort of like reddish. If I look over here, it's just sort of like these rainbow colors. But then there's one part of the book, one part of the mind that classifies and says books. And then the ahankar is like kind of insidious, useful in some ways, but then it figures out how to make everything all about me. Right? So it's like if we were just kind of enjoying color, there's no problem. You know, the problem is like, oh, what's your favorite color? My favorite color is purple. Well, my favorite color is green. We can't be friends. Right? And then just like extrapolate that out to like politics.
Interesting. I really do want to study a lot more Sanskrit stuff because there's such detailed maps of consciousness. And my little spiel I do on 5-MeO, essentially, and drawing upon a very limited Vedic knowledge, is that what to paraphrase, what we think of as the mind and what we think of as thoughts and basically the egoic functionality, they call the vritti. It's like the wind on water. It's like endless rippling thought forms. And they're rippling, rippling, rippling. One thought leads to another thought, ceaselessly, endlessly wanting to protect you, wanting to figure things out, wanting to do everything it can. But it's one frequency of consciousness. And it's just on the surface of the water of the depth of the mind itself. And the mind is more than the egoic mind. It's more than what we think of it really is. They say in the Vedic maps, if you go deeper into that mind stuff or sattva, you can reach Atman, right, or your true nature.
Right. All of those ripples don't actually have anything to do with who you are, like on an essential level.
It's the program running.
Like
right?
whether, like regardless of like your political stance or your favorite color, like it doesn't have anything to do with your soul.
Yeah, there's this depth to our being, not our doing, which is what 5-MeO can assist in revealing. So we see here on the table a beautiful little representation of a toad, which is part of my altar space. After my first experience with, which was synthetic 5-MeO in 2006, which was this white light super hadron collider of hyperspace, this pure presence of being, like when the egoic mind falls away, then that drop that's contained within the individuality opens to the entirety and enormity of all that is, potentially, with this experience. So the way I like to describe it is there's levels to this source consciousness within. And 5-MeO can assist in it because it is endogenous. It is natural to us. It is something that we have been in contact with and has been expressing itself through the human condition throughout all history. It's the backdoor access for like God's cheat code, right? And it's what's been built into us. But with the egoic aggregation over time and with the degradation of our ecosystem in the macro and in the micro of our ecosystem, we've lost contact with the divine within. It's still there, but the egoic mind, which I believe is sort of this, it's sort of like this takeaway or this compensatory thing for the fall. Like all of history is like 12,000 years or so old. It's debatable. It's a story. It's his story. It's told by the victors. There's, you know, a lot of conjecture around ancient cultures and golden ages and cyclic time. And it seems like at some point in his story or just before his story started, different cultures in their originating texts say we had a fall from consciousness. And in that fall from consciousness, if you've ever been in love and had that feeling of expansion and connection and belonging, that's not the intellectual mind, it's the heart mind. Science says we have three brains. We have the head brain, the heart brain with 70% neuronal cells, just like the brain, that feels, that connects, that loves, that knows in a way that the mind can't. And we have the gut instinct. They say we have a thought about a third of a second before we realize it, with our instinctual response, with our biome, with 7 trillion microorganisms or so in going in and out of gamma consciousness, this state of unity consciousness, and connecting, I believe, to the web, to that frequency of Indra's net or that interconnected web of being. These brains remain when that brain dominates or goes down. So at some point in prehistory, before we became into egoic consciousness, I believe, and this came to me as this download, it feels like we were connected to this unity field, and it's natural in these larger cycles of time. It's like we used to have 5-bar galactic Godhead consciousness, and over the course of his story, the signal degraded, and all of history is like 1-bar signal. And we've done the best we can, and what came to the fore to compensate from that loss of connection, of belonging with the beloved, with the divine, and with that expanded connection was the ego. And it's like we all have potentially species PTSD or some shock sort of response where we're separate from nature. We're separate from the divine. We see ourselves as individuals, even collectives as individuals, as on the outer. It's like we've been cast out of the garden, and it's time to come home, you know? And I believe that's what's basically, we're cutting to the core here, but basically these plant medicines and these earth medicines and these endogenous medicines are all in us. Like we are the medicine, and our allies, whether the plants or the toads or the other teachers that are out there, they're helping us to remember. But we have it within us, and it's like the cyclic time is coming back, and it's time to remember. And so it's time to relearn how to let go of the egoic control. It's not that we don't need the ego, it's just that it's out of control. It's overcompensating for the other brains, for the feeling brain, for the gut instinct and the connecting brain. It's trying to do everything, because we're so disconnected. And this is where psychedelics come in, because traditionally they're called ego dissolving, and they have the potential, when you get to the entheogens and the plants, like psychedelics mean mind manifesting. Entheogens, coined in the 80s, technically means awakening the divine within. It's a bit of a difference, and it's a big difference. That divine is within, and it's not about the mind anymore. It's about reconnecting through the heart to all that is. And I believe that's coming full circle. And that's the potential of these medicines, whether they're without or within.
You've mentioned a lot, like you've touched on the web of life, the wisdom of nature, the connection to nature. And, one of the things I'm seeing when you're talking about the signal degrading between us and the divine, I'm also thinking about how the environment has been degraded over time. And I am aware that it's very prominent in our culture now to take psychedelics and entheogens just for personal growth and personal healing and personal maintenance. And, we have people microdosing so they can do better at work, for example, right? Which is sort of different than taking psychedelics or entheogens in order to bring ourselves into harmony with nature, to bring about a age of recovery, environmental healing. Would you like to speak to that?
I don't want to pick on microdosing, but it sounds like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic so we can be better civil servants or better workers. Microdosing has a place, right? But the promise of the 60s was revolution, right? And it was this titanic newness, like this oldness which was new, but this potential for the fullness of the human condition. And there's a whole nother conversation here, which I know you've been involved in online, about the commodification of psychedelics, the commercialization, the pigeonholing, the ways that the medicalization of psychedelics, which is good on one level to bring it back into the culture. But the danger is if it stays just on that level and gets commodified, then psychedelics get boxed in and they don't get the fullness of their potential as revolutionary agents of change.
Right. We're here because we got high, right? It's like we're not doing other stuff. And I just kind of worry that, I don't want to see I don't want to see these medicines get tweaked just to keep people in their box and ignoring the call. Right. It's like, I think of Brave New World. I think of the Soma that just enables people to sort of endure, and I want to see people transform, living their best lives, being the best versions of themselves.
So in the 60s, a lot of things happened at once, right? There's all these revolutions and movements. There was the LSD movement, the civil rights movement, the ecology movement. And in some senses, they're all sort of different iterations of the same thing, of consciousness waking up to more levels of itself. And the ability for psychedelics or entheogens isn't just to heal individually, it's to connect us once we are healed or once we're clear of the blockages of the trauma of civilization, to remember that we are part of something bigger. And that thing is the mother, it's Gaia, it's the planet, it's the creator or the creation of the creator. And we are like one strand in the Gaian biome, it's gotten out of control. So these substances, back in the 60s, McKenna had a theory, and before him, Bear Owsley and Gerard Hurd had this theory that the plant medicines like ayahuasca, psilocybin, even the toad, even the 5-MeO from the toad, they're secreted by Gaia herself, and they act as species mediators to communicate across the species lines and to tune us back in and to bring us back into that web of life and to bring us back in a feeling sense not the egoic mind sense, which is separated from nature. So I think that the potential of these times is still revolutionary. And it doesn't have to be in a march on the Pentagon way, because it's gone through iterations over generations where it's now like the slow food movement. Psychedelics are everywhere. Every major, media periodical and television show is falling over themselves to comment on either microdosing or MDMA for PTSD or ayahuasca. 5-MeO hasn't got that much attention yet if you don't look at YouTube and certain Mexican practitioners. But it will.
That's a big yet.
That's a bit yet, yeah. So let's talk about 5-MeO, shall we?
We haven't been?
Well, let's just zero in on it a bit more, because we're doing a big historical perspective. So to tie that in, I believe that it's not just all connected. It's beautifully, impeccably, divinely perfect. Thank you, Great Spirit. Thank you for this gift, for this moment, for this life and this opportunity to incarnate and to express everything we can. The times, they are a-changing. We've had a few successive generations now, not just of psychedelics in the 60s, but the resurgence of shamanism in the West, of plant medicines, and each one is cascading and piggybacking, and it's leading to something, I believe, something bigger. So many years ago, my dear sister, Maya Larissa, told me this little anecdote. She said all the entheogens like psilocybin, San Pedro, psilocybin, San Pedro, name them all, they're like baubles on a Christmas tree or branches on the tree of life. And the star at the top of the tree, the light, is 5-MeO DMT. That seemed very true to me. And it seems to me in the larger cultural unfolding, we've had at least a whole generation of ayahuasca, which is where I started out. I started out with LSD, previously. That had its time, even in the 90s and the resurgence, rave culture. Then there's this next iteration, which was the plant medicine iteration and ayahuasca. And essentially, Westerners get caught up on the visionary state. When I interviewed a lot of shamans in the Amazon, they said, yeah, people are coming down for healing, but everyone's wanting the visions. And it's like Westerners only believe it if they see it. And that's the mind again. And the curandero said to me, it's the visions are often, they're very beautiful, they might be very personal, there might be transmissions of intention there, and they're a little bit like when they put a TV on in the dentist room when you're getting an operation. It's like can be a bit of a distraction. It's all about the feeling with ayahuasca. And ayahuasca, as a great Gaian avatar, is essentially, I believe, the main thing she's been doing when she reaches out to embrace the world is to clean us, to cleanse us. The healing comes from the cleansing. And when we are cleansed and when we are clean, we're whole again. That's holy. And then when we're holy, then we can connect again, not just to what's without, but to what's within, the star at the top of the tree, right? And so at the cusp of this generation of ayahuasca, along comes this beautiful divine gift from Mother Earth in the form of the Bufo Alvarius toad. So 5-MeO DMT has been around for a long time. It was technically around in the 60s. Synthetic 5-MeO DMT has been known about, synthesized since at least the 30s or so. Or was it the 50s? It's been reported in the 50s. It didn't really take off because it's so intense. I mean, the synthetic needs even less amount than the toad. It does catapult you potentially into the most intense, super radiating heart of all existence that there is. And it's a very powerful sacrament. It is a medicine, I believe, and it is something which needs to be approached with great reverence and respect and care. It's not recreational. It's so not recreational. It is a potential meeting with your true nature, as they say in the Vedic maps, and it can be damaging. Let's look upon that. It can be damaging for the soul that is not ready to know that it is the flowering soul, to awaken to that.
Powerful. How can somebody start to prepare their soul for this medicine?
So many angles to this whole conversation. It's all jumping around, but let me tell you what I really feel. Tell you what I feel, what I really, really feel. We're not in control, right? It's the ego again that thinks we are. And Dennis McKenna has that riff. So those monkeys think that they're in control. That's what ayahuasca told him. If and when you've had an experience of expanded consciousness, usually, you know, science knows they've done legal tests with ayahuasca, with psilocybin, with LSD, with EEG and MRI machines. And they know that if essentially psychoactive materials are switching off these regional clusters of the brain called the default mode network. And the substance isn't the thing which takes you on that journey. It's switching off the bits of the brain that are stopping you from being in that expanded spectrum of full consciousness all the time, right? So toad medicine is very similar. Technically it's working on the frontal lobes, the parietal lobe and frontal lobe of the brain, where that regional sense of ego and identity resides, and it's lowering that veil. So to answer your question, when these filters go down and we open up to expanded consciousness or the totality of consciousness, there can be an intuitive understanding of that space according to where you end up. In that understanding, what I have felt is that we are part of and embedded within this larger, loving, intelligent organism, which is the divine source. And it is the thing which is controlling the flow of the souls as they flower. So nature doesn't make mistakes. Nature conserves energy, and nature's systems seem to replicate on different scales of nature. It doesn't stop at the planetary biosphere. It goes out into the, you know, solar system, the galactic biosphere, onwards into the universe. If you've ever seen on Facebook those, like, you know, comparison pictures of the neuronal structure of the brain and the galaxies, where they look pretty identical on different scales, right? So the first time I did 5-MeO, when I was shot into the mind of God, it was like 9 minutes on the outside, because we had the footage and it's in the movie Eye Awakenings. And there was just this consciousness of consciousness, what essentially I call the witness. There's these levels of, in the Vedic maps, of awakening into divine consciousness or samadhi. And essentially level 3 is like Sambhoga bliss body. People say, what's level 1 and 2? And I don't know. I say dogs are level 2 and cats are level 1. Level 3 is like Sambhoga bliss body, that unity field where you can be like lowering the mind, opening the heart, releasing your endogenous 5-MeO or from an external source, connecting to the divine field that's all around, feeling that feeling of the density of tryptamine information, which is full. It's full of so much richness. And that's level 3. Level 4, going further into the void, the white light, the unity field. There's this potential of just the thinnest sliver of consciousness, what I call the witness, just, oh my God, oh my God, oh my Godding, and verbing into the totality. So my first time was like that for 9 minutes on the outside, eternity on the inside, going in, just witnessing and drinking in the ocean of divine love. And at the same time, the vibration of divine love was literally waveforms coming to me, hitting my vibrational consciousness and opening me and revealing that I was it. In that space, I understood that all is connected, that all is one, and that one is running the show. And there's the creation. There's so many cultures that understand this. You know, all these ancient cultures, all these mythologies, all these religions, or even quantum physics says the implicate and the explicate. You know, these language terms, these words we have to describe the indescribable. But essentially, it almost feels like Source is source, and then source incarnates into and is the creation. And in that creation, there's a conservation of energy, and there's a potentiation of timing, of divine moments of timing, that everyone's soul blossoms when it's time. So it's like we're all petals on the heavenly flower, you know? My youngest daughter's name is Aluna Leilani Dazam. Leilani in Hawaiian is the heavenly flower. Think of the 1,000-petaled lotus of consciousness as it blossoms, and then magnify that by infinity, right? Everything is it. We are it. And it is gestating itself. It is curating itself. It is sculpting itself as the creation. And in different cycles of time, there are different potentials for itself. Like the seed awakens and it grows and it blossoms and it flowers. And in this cycle of time, I think we are all awakening. I mean, everyone awakens, but some times are more awakening than others. And it seems to be that there is a momentum and a planetary crisis, a planetary emergency within which, because it's all perfect and it's all source having an emergency with itself, right? There's a potential for an emergence from the emergency, from the pressure of the times, not just socio-politically and all your American politics and everything that's happening. Vote tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yeah. But from the ecological transformation, the degradation, the devastation, the death of the old and the rebirth of the new, these are the times, and this is the opportunity for that cultivation of consciousness. And people's souls will blossom and awaken when they're ready.
Yes, and I don't want to let you off the hook that easy.
Jesus.
because I also feel like you contradicted yourself a little bit, because you said we're all blossoming in our own time and this is the time for cultivation, right? So yes, we are all blossoming in our own time, but we are also doing stuff. Like you, otherwise, you know, you wouldn't do the medicine at all. Like, what would be the point? It doesn't matter. Your soul's blossoming. So, you know, it's like what, and I'm aware that this medicine supercharges it. I'm wondering, you know, this is the integration circle. You know, it's like what, like, how do we prepare? How do we cultivate to increase the soil, to increase the fertility of the soil and the brightness of the light and the atmosphere within which the plant is growing, because there is maybe not much time, because we are in a place of crisis.
Okay. So I want to talk about toad, because we haven't really gotten depth into that to answer your question. So on the piggyback of a generation of ayahuasca cleansing and revealing our own potential, the Bufo Alvarius toad arrives. The Bufo Alvarius toad lives in the north of Mexico in the Sonoran Desert, in narco-drug territory, in poverty. It's the most sacred creature. It contains, in its parotoid glands, on its neck, on its legs, on its feet, it contains the medicine of 5-Meo Dmt, which we've been describing, as well as about 17 other tryptamines and alkaloids in there. This medicine doesn't have an unbroken lineage like the ayahuasca cultures of South America. It has a modern lineage. It has largely come to the awareness of the world through different Mexican practitioners promoting the medicine. I first did the medicine with Octavio Redig in Australia. And the toad is really entering into an existing psychedelic, entheogenic, shamanic, cultural ecosystem. So how do we prepare for this? There are ways, you're right, and we should prepare for this, because this is the most powerful entheogen on the planet. The only thing as powerful as 5-MeO is the human ego. Some people hold on. So that ocean of consciousness, which we've touched upon before, we got to level 4 in the witness and that oh my godding. There's an extra level in the levels of samadhi, in the stepping stones of samadhi, or 5th level seedless samadhi, within which someone going into that space can like witness, and then at some point, if there's less resistance or there's grace, let go. And in the letting go, the mind is completely gone and the drop has fully become the ocean. And often people in the 5-MeO experience don't remember because the mind has gone. And that is one of the pros and the cons, right?
Hard to remember stuff without a mind.
There are ways, right? There's somatic memory. There's heart memory. It can come back. So I just don't know if we've expressed enough how big this experience is, right? And this is not to glamorize it. This is not to promote it in a way that says, you should all do 5-MeO DMT. You all are 5-MeO DMT. So this is a very good question. How do we prepare for this? How do we cultivate the preparation and the awareness and that soul that wants to have this experience? So the 5-MeO experience is native to our consciousness, to our being. And you don't need to do toad medicine or synthetic 5-MeO. Breath work can get you there. Tantra can get you there. Grace can get you there. People have spontaneous mystical experiences, right? But for the unprepared, this is very dangerous, right? This is not something for an ego which is not stable to begin with. It seems a bit like a contradiction, but you need a stable ego to let go of the ego. Otherwise, it's not going to be very good on the way back. It could fragment. It could really schizoid out. It could like shatter an unprepared mind. It shatters most minds, but the mind is very strong. It comes back. It re-heals. It re-comes back. So, you know, this is what I feel we're still approaching entheogens and the sacred medicines the way we did psychedelics. Not to say that it's just recreational, but there's still some Western type of consumerism around it, of thinking that we take this thing and it will do this to us. Well, the medicines are a bit different than that. They're not one dose fits all, one size fits all. And especially with 5-MeO, some practitioners, you know, they will give large doses of medicine and people get damaged. There's practitioners out there. There's very valuable community websites like the Toad Forum and Support website. There's lots of Facebook groups for Toad medicine, sharing stories and wisdom and warnings as well. But essentially, if someone is dropped into what we call a full release 5-MeO experience from a toad or synthetic medicine, it goes from 0 to 100 or 0 to infinity in seconds. And so it can be shattering. So one way to prepare for it, if you are experiencing 5-MeO through a shamanic facilitation, is to go slowly and to check in, to do your homework about your facilitator and the medicine and what to expect. Some facilitators choose a stepping stone method to go gently into that infinite ocean within.
This is something I want to interrupt because I've talked to people and this comes up, is that people want to go hard, fast, because they don't know when they're going to get another chance. And there are these access issues because, you know, it's hard to come by in some circles. And so people are like, oh my God, if I don't do it now, regardless of whether I'm ready, and if I don't do as much as I can, regardless of whether or not I'm ready, I'm missing out. And as a result, they sometimes have a tough time.
That's really unfortunate to hear. And because of this, we've discussed a little bit about the commodification, and we could just say it's the integration of the sacred medicines into a capitalist structure, right? So basically something like ayahuasca, she's reaching out to embrace the world, she's changing hearts and minds, but she's also having to do it through Western 9-to-5 money culture. So there's ceremony, there's sacred ceremony, there's ritual, and there's an exchange for it. And so with Toad medicine, it's coming on the piggyback of ayahuasca culture. I believe that that's energetically for a reason, but also culturally, it's coming into the supply and demand of the business of spirituality. But also, I mean, this gets into a whole aspect of the medicine culture. There's a glut of toad medicine out there, and there's a...
As far as you know.
I know. And there's not enough good facilitators. And this is an issue of how the sacred medicines that don't have a lineage with curanderos or shamans or medicine people handing down from generation to the next, for teachers to teach from indigenous cultures. When I made my documentary with Niles Heckman in 2015, Shamans of the Global Village, with Octavia Reddick, we wanted to look at medicine people that had a lineage, that were connected to, that trained with indigenous people, and the indigenous people trained with the medicines that connected to the planet. So it goes planet, plant, plan. You know, there's a sequence of events and of lineage. Toad medicine doesn't have that, and it has this growth spurt in the last decade or even 7 years, even less, of exploding into an existing consumerist, capitalist, shamanic medicine community globally, and being the most powerful medicine there is, and good people who are choosing to answer the call of serving the medicine, learning on their feet, learning the hard way, and having supply-demand issues with the shamanic community. So I would say to anyone who feels that urgency to do this, wait a bit. Like, feel into yourself. Do that preparation we were talking about before. How do you prepare for this?
I actually blew it. I've got to call myself out. Like, I blew it with the preparation. One of my preparation practices is I practice gratitude. I feel like the more I go into something with like a spirit of gratitude and humility, the better off I am. And I forgot at the beginning, I forgot to thank the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. And they've done a lot of work. A lot of you found out about it through their website. They've done a ton of work promoting this and helping set up and all that kind of stuff. So if we don't mind having a commercial break, could we give them a round of applause? And if you don't know how to find them, you can sign up on the list in the back. Yeah, they wave. Hi, Seth, Damla. So thank you for doing that, for letting me take that short commercial break. Gratitude and humility. The next question I had was, what are the qualities that you appreciate in these newly minted practitioners? Like when you meet a toad practitioner and you're like, that guy's got it, that gal, guys and gals, what are those qualities that you feel like they possess, that you appreciate, feel like is good and lends itself to this work?
A good heart, empathy, kindness, respect. I mean, if you've ever been in an ayahuasca circle, you know that a good shaman, in a Western term, or a curandero, an indigenous term, they train for potentially decades to do the work that they do with ayahuasca, to know the songs, the icaros, to serve the medicine, to be able to work under the influence of the medicine, to connect to the spirits. We don't have that same history and legacy with 5-MeO culture. We're getting it. And we're finding, or people are finding themselves. Like, there's something which happens, like, if 10 people do ayahuasca, maybe 4 will stay in the culture and continue to drink, and maybe 1 or maybe half a person will want to be called to the medicine, because it's hard work. Toad is just as hard in its own way, but it's some ridiculous statistic like 2 out of 3 people are called to the medicine. But I feel, and we talked about this at the World Bufo Alvarius Congress in Mexico City in July, how you can be in service to the medicine, to what you felt, to what is opened within you, to that blossoming, to that connection of the unity field that's like, oh my God, like I get it. And now what, right? It doesn't mean that because you may or may not be able to access the toad medicine, which is sacred and shouldn't be commercialized and should be kept in safe hands of the people who are ready to serve it. and you have a pipe that you can serve it, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot to hold that space. So some people say, James Orrock, who's another 5-MeO commentator and a good friend, he says that in his estimation, the only person who should serve 5-MeO DMT is a registered nurse. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I can sort of see where you're getting at. You want to have medical training. If someone stops breathing, if someone, if someone has a heart attack, if someone has high or low blood pressure and they put pressure in their heart again, if people have had any blows to the head and any rhythmic ischemias, any areas where blood is not flowing because of previous concussions and things like that, if there's any contraindications, if you're on SSRIs, and SSRIs can cause serotonin damage, but essentially the SSRI is occupying the 5-HT2A receptor site, same as the medicine, and usually it blunts the medicine, so it stops you from sort of lifting off. There is so many medicines or pharmaceutical medicines that the average American is on, I have discovered in this country, that it can be very dangerous to work with plant medicines or toad medicine or 5-MeO if there are contraindications. So people need to be aware of this. There have been casualties and there have been deaths with 5-MeO. Thankfully, not many, statistically, according to the rapid growth of the community and the culture. But I can see what James Orrock says about a nurse, but I don't believe that that is the best way to serve. I think that this medicine it's not just a medical thing. You're not just having this physiological response where we can say, oh, your brainwave activity has diminished and your alpha wave activity and your theta wave activity have merged into gamma, which is a frequency which usually has 0.5 of a second of cohesion, which is like unity. And there's hypercoherence in the two hemispheres of your brain and the whole activity is lighting up. And your heart rate's good. I mean, it's not just a physical thing. You're going on this spiritual journey of this ultimate realization that is beyond the intellect, this knowing, and you can't measure that. You can't measure that from the outside, and a nurse doesn't know enough about that. So some people on the medicine go into Shavasana, yoga pose, of full like acceptance and just letting go and full bliss sort of body on the outside. Some people spasm, right? And some people, I know one person that's got up and run backwards, his mind's offline and his body's running around like a headless chicken. Many people scream and they're letting go, or there's just enough of an ego left to witness the naked face of God and realize it is awful, full of awe. It is too much for the little human being to hold. And some people run screaming from that in the medicine state. And some people are screaming on the inside, but they look fine on the outside. Some people are screaming on the outside, but they're fine on the inside. And a nurse doesn't necessarily know this. I believe the closest approximation to this role of facilitator is that of a doula or a midwife, and that there's an empathy, and a good facilitator has very good empathy to know when not to interfere and to know when you need to interfere and the baby's head is upside down and they're going to choke on the umbilical cord on that astral unless you do something, right? So some people also say, don't go to a facilitator if they take the medicine themselves. Some facilitators do take the medicine themselves, not a lot of medicine, but enough to tune in, to allow that ego to go down and to be in service to the spirit that comes through, to be able to know what feels right in that moment for that particular person. In general, a facilitator, I believe, should let the person know that it's up to them to define their boundaries of consent and to not be touched unless there is an immediate physical need. If someone's choking, sometimes people have chakra blockages and it looks like there's a lot of energy that's not coming through in a certain spot, and a facilitator may assist in that energy with a rattle or hands or whatever. There needs to be consent beforehand. There needs to be a relationship between the facilitator and the guest, the patient, the client, the passenger, the seeker. So that midwife, or that feeling of empathy of the person who is able to know where the person is at, more or less, or to hold space for them, is crucial. And many people are coming to this medicine. And I said at the start, it's like, if you're feeling the call, if you've experienced this medicine, my friend Mario in Mexico, we have this thing we say, 5-MeO, it's like a molecule, right? It is. It's like this thing we have within us, but it's like this, once you connect to the unity field, you're always on. The mind comes back online, and then the 9 to 5 reality is still there. But there's this seed within you which is germinated. If you go to that stage 5 samadhi and you fully let go and you become that oceanic consciousness, it's like when a wildfire goes through a forest and it burns off all the undergrowth and it germinates the seeds from the intense heat. I call it a galactivation. It's like God's factory reset. It sets off all the systems. You have the psychic effect, and then it has this effect on the endocrine system, which is flushing the body clean. It's anti-inflammatory. It's this full reset. And in that opening, in that full releaseness, in that galactivation, something is switched on. It's like a hard drive is initialized. And that living information, that vibration of the ocean in your drop is alive within you. And that aliveness is so precious and so sacred. And I understand, because I have felt it, the call to be in service to the medicine. And the medicine is all of us, and the medicine is the unity field. But ask yourself how you can best be of service. It doesn't mean necessarily being on the front lines as a facilitator, because there's damage on the front lines from too many people having access. There's all these socio-political issues around the toad medicine, indigenous cultures. It's like they're sitting on liquid gold or oil, and it's this new boom bust thing that's happening in Mexico. There's certain unscrupulous individuals selling the medicine on Facebook, not through proper channels. One of the best things that has come out of Peru is not just ayahuasca, it's the idea of ceremony, of ritual, of a container, of a correct way to engage with the sacred medicines. So toad medicine is evolving that same dynamic. We're bringing the idea of the circle, of the group, of the container, of the ritual, of the ceremony to the medicine. And I believe it needs that. It needs that because without that, it's just not held. And that's where a lot of damage can happen. And it's, people are learning. We did the World Bufo Alvarius Congress. There's organizations out there. There's lots of Facebook groups. There's a sense of community all around the world, which is so powerful and so strong, revolving around the 5-MeO experience, because something is switched on. I like to call it a samadhi mesh network. So in computing terms, mesh networks are like, the signal gets stronger the more units that join it. It's like an internet, but like an intranet. And it can enhance and bounce the signal out, because the more nodes that join that network, the bigger the network gets. And so as the 5-MeO global network grows and people come online and that vibration remains alive within them, it's like a samadhi mesh network. And so, then we come to the question of, what do we do with that?
What? No. Well, what I'm curious is where you'd like to see this go, right? What do we do with that? What's our best case scenario? And what are some of the challenges that it faces? And you've mentioned some of this unscrupulous behavior and so on and so forth. What are some of the other challenges that this will face as it grows into an enlightenment culture, the samadhi mesh network,
So, like all good things, there's many teething issues and growth challenges. Number one is the preservation and conservation of the Bufo Alvarius toad itself. I have a not-for-profit organization called the Terra Incognita Project. I got it from Terence, Terra Incognita, but it's Latin for the invisible landscape or the divine within. And we were working with neuroscience and looking at what's happening in the brain structure. We're working with Juan Acosta and Michael Villanueva and others as well to look at what's happening there. But we've also spearheaded some conservation initiatives. And not just we, but there needs to be more work done. It's such a big thing, conservation. And generally people say in the community that the Bufo Alvarius toad is endangered. I have done a bit of research and a bit of on-the-ground conservation work and talk with other conservationists. We don't really know. We do know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, and this great upswelling of interest in the Bufo. We know that the indigenous communities of the Sonoran Desert all know about the Bufo now. Some people are paying teenagers to go out and milk the Bufo. In general, there's a lot of push for conservation, for fair trade toad programs, for understanding best practices around handling toads to not damage them, to respect them and leave them in their environments. And we don't know. Most of the toads that are in Sonora are seen around the shanty towns, the pueblos, where they go towards the lights because that's where the insects are. In the deeper desert, it's narco-drug territory. It's dangerous. People die out there. And it's isolated. And I believe that they're okay. There's climate change. We don't know. But more conservation work needs to be done to protect the toad in general. More community work needs to be done to integrate the flow of the medicine into our structure, our socio-economic, political, community structures. And again, that's with ceremony and ritual and people plugging in, people going, well, how can I be of service? How can I come together? How can we work together? That's sort of the grassroots level. On a spiritual level, on an experiential level, there's a lot of work to be done. And I believe that if you have had a 5-MeO experience, and, you know, Rick Strassman did these tests with potentially Dmt in the 90s, documented in his book for DMT, the spirit molecule, which was also a documentary by Mitch Schultz. But both NN and 5-MeO DMT potentially, he believes, are present at birth, at death, and at near-death experiences. So everyone has the potential for 5-MeO experiences within them. But if you've had a peak 5-MeO samadhi experience, let's say, what then? What do we do with it then? As more and more people come online into the Samadhi Mesh network, it doesn't necessarily stop there. It's begun there. And so that vibration of 5-MeO, which is alive within us, of source consciousness, and I've been reading this translation of the commentary on the Upanishads from 1935, and they describe this concept of the Buddhi, of like this seed of God that we have within us that grows and has these like 7 layers and levels. So I say to people, after your 5-MeO experience, you know, your body is a temple. It's not just a New Age bumper sticker. It's true. Your body is a temple to house that divine experience that you've experienced within. Everything is within you. Or your portal to the unity field connection is within your divine vessel. So it is really critical to nurture and to optimize your divine vessel because it's your temple. It's your little mini ceremony every day. Every day is your gift, your prayer back, right? And then if the vessel is kept clean, the vibration can remain optimal. And then potentially, and this could happen before as well as after, modalities like breath work, like meditation, like just mindfulness, things that tune us in, that vibration is there. So many, not everyone, but many people have what they call reactivations from 5-MeO. There's a bit of synaptic discharge in the first 24 hours after a peak 5-MeO experience. But essentially, I don't think it's just neurochemical. Essentially, you've opened up that divine channel and those doorways and pathways are open. And then some people find around 3, 4 a.m. when blood sugars are lowest and your natural 5-MeO is highest, they can cusp back into that divine space, into that 5-MeO activation space. But it's not necessarily, I believe, a reactivation. I believe you're galactivated. Once you've had that fullness of the experience, it's on. And it's always going to be on. It's up to you to dance with it. It's up to you to tune into it, because you can come straight back to the mind and it's still on, but it's the beloved. It's like, when are we going to go on a date? When are we going to, when are you going to pay attention to me? When are we going to go there again? Right? And so after the peak experience, go there again. Right? It's like, we can go there individually. We can focus on going in. We can have a practice. And many, many people that have had a 5-MeO external experience and a peak experience who are meditators say their meditation practice goes so much deeper and so much easier because those pathways are open. So we could also have a group integration experience where people that have had a 5-MeO fullness, a full release, could come together and do breath work and do meditation. And that samadhi mesh network, there can be an entrainment, because we're all part of that puzzle. We're all part of the network. Someone in a group, how many people here have had an external 5-MeO activation? Oh my, we should do some breath work. I really believe this is, we should come to the TAM immigration breathwork things.
TAM integration.
Yeah, potentially. Because it's like this potential is alive within us, and it just wants to be fed. It wants to be engaged with.
Do you want to chant some ohms or something?
Yeah, we could chant some ohms at the end of the night. We'll do that. Potentially, it's like we're open, and it's the challenge is, and the invitation is to open and to remain open. How do we remain open in what the 5-MeO experience reveals?
Well, I'd love to name and kind of honor something, because you're saying things like breath work and meditation, but you've been saying another word like several times. And I sort of feel like it's been my experience that like this one activity keeps me in that space and keeps me out of the self-centeredness and keeps me in the expanded state as much as anything else. And those are acts of service. Like anytime that I'm focused on like helping others instead of just trying to figure out what's in it for me, like I'm in a good place.
I love you, Daniel.
I love you too, man.
Really, really, really good points. Because when the mind lowers and the heart opens to that fullness, that's the fruition. That's the flowering soul. And that connection of the heart, that's where the service comes from. That's where the humbleness and the humility, that's where the love comes from. And so the potential there is like, how can we be in service to the 5-MeO community, to the blossoming and the awakening of us individually and collectively, by being in service, as you say, by being humble, by recognizing everyone has the divine spark within them, and to recognize that, respond from a place of empathy, from a place of oneness. Because once you've been to that oneness and come back, don't rush back to the aloneness, to the individualness, and to the egoic mind frequency. Stay in the heart, stay centered, stay connected, stay open, and then open to everyone. Very good points.
Like the Grateful Dead said, turn on your love light, leave it on.
Yeah.
What do you think about serving some of the attendees and answering some questions?
Yeah, okay, let me think. Wait a sec. Tying off that last thread.
Yeah.
All right, let's throw it to the audience, yeah.
So we will open it up to questions from the audience. We'll also, if you're watching via the live stream, now would be a good time because we're going to filter those in as well. There is a microphone here if you'd like to line up against this wall. I would ask that you keep your questions actually questions, as opposed to like, this is my story, it's like, because we want to get to as many people as possible. So if we could have concise, coherent questions for our guest.
Organic versus synthetic.
Yes, please.
Perfect.
You know, the hippies say, what is synthetic? It's like it's another language label. It's like God made the humans that made the lab that made the synthetic. So where do you draw the line? All right, so there is a experiential difference. It's like I usually say it's like Safari or Firefox. You're both going to the same internet, but it's a different browser and it's got a little bit of different tweaks. I find the synthetic, it goes straight to the light. It goes straight to that source. But, you know, the last time I did experience it in countries where it was legal, I felt that it was cerebral. I felt that it was getting me there, but it wasn't opening my heart. And I realized that it wasn't my medicine. The toad is my medicine. That is what I have a relationship with. And toad can also put a load on the heart. There's, you know, bufotoxin is its actual, you know, name. So you've got to be careful there. But there's something intangibly present in maybe the concoction of toad being those 17 other tryptamines and alkaloids in the secretion, even though when it's smoked, they say that it's just 5-MeO that's going. But I can always tell the difference, like the taste, not the taste, but the flavor or the nuance of it. But essentially, they're two browsers that go to the same source. And some people say that we need to be, you know, really developing the synthetic pathways more to take the load off the toad and the conservation of the toad. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so this is a little bit of like what happened to me, but I'm going to make it a question for sure. So on that level 5, where it's ego dissolves and it's one with everything, I experienced something beyond that, which was everything dissolves and it's nothing, and we're in a pure black void.
Ah, the black void. Yeah. Enough people do report that. I mean, we're getting into deep metaphysics here. Who's to say? And the whole night's metaphysics, right? So there's the samadhi levels. There's a unity field. Thank you for your sharing question. There's this potential to open to the fullness of the unity field and become that oceanic consciousness. For me personally, that's always been white light. And in the spectrum of, you know, light, the white light is like the density of everything. And that first time I did the synthetic in 2006, I really felt the white light was also, it's vibration. So we're seeing light, but the seeing is also just a different modulation of the sound, because it's all vibration. So some people in that experience, and in the Vedas, they mentioned the sound, and it's not just like the Om, the primal vibration, which is the sound of the universe creating itself. There's other frequency sounds which are documented in the Vedic maps and could be seen. Some people, everyone has a different capacity as well, which I've noticed over time with larger groups of people that I've seen experiencing the medicine. We all have this potential within us, but we all have slightly different wetware, different operating systems. Some people have like this galactic antenna and seem to get the unity field and the interconnectedness. Other people, you know, white out and don't have maybe the capacity to receive the fullness of the signal because it just overloads, it's too much. But I think with training, we could all get up to the same levels of recognizing what the differences are and how we can entrain each other and teach each other. Some people have reported going to this darkness, which is beyond the void of the white light. And I don't know, that sounds like something I've heard of in metaphysics as well, but I don't know. But I don't think it's necessarily bad. There's not this Manichaean dichotomy of black and white that one's good and one's evil. It's the Tao, but I think, I don't know, like, I don't know. I do not know.
You could have opened with that.
Next time.
Thank you both for having this. We've been talking a lot about the metaphysical, and I'll just use my experience just as a quick touching point for the question. I've experienced and I've heard with others that there's the physical, the manifestational power of this medicine. And I'd be curious, the medicinal, like actual medicinal practice. My experience, I had a reawakening in a man's home who is suffering from Alzheimer's. Was shown that there's connection, the awakening and the forgetting, and now finding research from National Institute of Health about the connection of DMT and these different drugs and tryptamines for the cure. And it's a conversation. I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, but like the manifestation, like the things that just happen in real life because of this medicine and like the potentials for healing actual ills. Can you maybe dive into that and talk a little bit about that?
So, yeah, we've talked a lot about the spiritual and the psychic effect, but I mentioned before that there's a couple of really good studies. Attila Zazabo from Europe did a study on tryptamines, or maybe even specifically 5-MeO as an immunomodulator, and the way it affects the endocrine system, and it's lowering inflammation, but it's also potentially got anti-cancer or tumor, like reducing tumors as well. There's a study that came out about 2-3 weeks ago looking at, again, neurogenesis and the ability of 5-MeO to potentially not just like repair bits of the brain, but potentially even grow new dendrites and new pathways. And this is really interesting because this medicine is still so new in modern culture, and we don't have hardly any statistical or medical information on people that are using this in the medium to long term and doing brainwaves of not just before and after readings like Dr. Wan and others have done, but what is the long-term brain structural change if you were to do microdoses of toad over a certain amount of time? Would you see new brain structures forming, more dendrites forming potentially? That is a potential outcome. With the Alzheimer's thing, I know that they were saying ayahuasca and psilocybin, things like that, because of the neurogenesis, may help Alzheimer's, and maybe 5-MeO as well. I mean, it's such a shock and release, that it's shaking things up, that it might be good for things like that as well. The medical thing, yeah, I think there's different organizations looking at creating, legal tests with synthetic 5-MeO, looking at the medical usages. The use for all of these shamanic and entheogenic medicines for things like PTSD and stress is on the increase. We know, MAPS are doing the MDMA tests and psilocybin's coming in as well. So people are wanting to look at 5-MeO for those usages as well. Could be great. It could be like using, I don't know, a screwdriver to open the sun or something. Like the scale of these things, like the potential of 5-MeO and to use it to help people deal with their PTSD and go back to work could be really not utilizing its full potential. But there's definitely medical benefits that can be gained from this. And I applaud all the organizations who are doing medical research with psychedelics and entheogens, because it needs to be done. And it's part of a larger puzzle of a shamanic and a spiritual awakening. And, like when I first went down to Peru so long ago now, they said to me, what we think of in the West as medicine isn't what they think of. For them, a medicine is something you have a relationship with. The plants, it's not just a chemical, it's the spirit in the plant, right? And it's even in the word dis-ease. It's like you're not at ease, you're not at equilibrium, you're not in your truth, you're not in your center. And so when the toad medicine lowers the mind, it's like a cork comes off a bottle. And in indigenous cultures, they believe we have an energetic body and an emotional body and a physical body. And humans are the only animals which store tension and stress and trauma. All the animals shake it out in the moment when they're in flight and fear responses. We store it, and that can manifest as physical illness. And so a lot of the potential healings from 5-MeO and these medicines are from when we start to let go of the mind and start to release stuff we've been storing. So there's potentially great medicinal applications, but it's probably not going to be a John Hopkins study that's going to be looked at in the same way that the shamanic applications of these medicines are.
I think I did recently see a study Alan Davis is publishing about, apparently it's good for anxiety.
Yeah. Well, conversely, it can cause people to be very anxious before they take it. And then if you do a handshake dose and meet the medicine just gently and put your toes in the water of that source ocean consciousness within, it can relieve a bit of anxiety and give internal consent to want to go deeper.
Right. I mean, I guess I just sort of feel like if you have just been staring at the awe-inspiring, terrible face of God, then probably just talking to your coworkers around the water cooler is probably going to be easier.
Aho.
All right, thank you guys. I wanted to ask for your tips or advice to facilitators or home explorers regarding safety and the aspect of like ambulatory movement and how to protect people when they're running from the face of God into a window or something, or like at what point do you start to control their body movement or protect them, or what you might expect from people. Secondly, with regards to physical health, like what are some of the, you mentioned that there have been some deaths, and I'm curious to know what those might have come from. And then psychological, how you can help protect people from.
That's 4 questions.
Sorry, answer whichever ones you like.
Trying to remember one. Who are these home owner users? Who are these people doing 5-MeO? So, you know, like around 2016 or so, the Chinese labs made 5-MeO illegal. 5-MeO was only made illegal on, I think my friend calls it Black Friday, some January 2011. And before that, it had escaped the analog laws and it had been completely legal. And it is still legal in most countries of the world. It's only in about, depending on who you talk to, between 7 to 11 countries where they actually legislated against it. I'm going to blank out on all your 4 questions now.
Safety for facilitators.
Thank you. Yeah. So in terms of ability to have access to 5-MeO in their homes, the dark web and avenues like that are pretty much dried up. And from what I hear from people in countries where this is legal, the synthetic is pretty much drying up at the same time that toad is pretty much proliferating everywhere in a funny karmic counterbalance. So I would never advise anyone to do this on their own, not on a large dose. Everything could happen and anything could happen. And the traditional things of doing any psychedelic entheogen on your own, if you're out of it in whatever degree, if you choke on your own vomit, if you're asphyxiated, if, you know, a million things could go wrong. So it's not always have a sitter, always have someone there, always, please. If you're facilitating this medicine, it is a great responsibility and a great privilege. And there's a lot of movement within the global community and a lot of interest in people facilitating and a lot of, I mean, most of the existing facilitators are under 5 years old. So it's hard to say, no one's saying you shouldn't facilitate, but look into where the calling is coming from, look into what your skills are. So it's been said, there's a group out there called the Conclave, I believe, who have released a document on best practices for working with 5-MeO DMT and also some integration guidelines. And they suggest things like in the environment, it be safe, it be sacred, it be a space within which there's not going to be interruption, that is held. You don't have to necessarily believe in any spirituality. It doesn't have to be a shamanic ceremony. It might just be, you know, a facilitator in a therapeutic environment, guiding and helping. People should look for, facilitators really should be screening. I mean, some of the large dangers and some of the things that happen to people in their experiences can be diminished or can be looked after before they go into the experience. So someone should be psychologically prepared, and it's really hard to describe. You can describe in detail all these Vedic maps, all this expansion of consciousness, but when you're there on the front line of God, it's shocking, right? And so it's not something you can fully prepare for, but there needs to be some intellectual preparation. You need to be in good health.
Yeah, could I narrow the question to like physical safety in regards to like kind of convulsions or like the...
Well, that could be a dosage thing too. So anyone with a heart condition shouldn't do it. Some of the deaths that have occurred in Mexico have come from people who have heart conditions. So no one with a weak heart should be doing this because of the pressure it could put on the heart. There's a very sudden glucose shift. So anyone with high blood pressure is also a risk. Low blood pressure could be a risk, but it's probably less dangerous for the heart. Sometimes people with asthma or the breathing reflex thing can be an issue. I mentioned the rhythmic ischemias, things like that, medications. So the convulsions and things like that, it's hard to say. I mean, if anyone has issues or history of any mental instability, psychotic breaks, underlying issues where they have those type of mental conditions, this is probably not for them because there's not the solidity. This is going to reduce the ego, is a nice way to say it. Some people say ego death. Some people say platform orgasm because it's still that letting go and letting go and letting go into a sense of ecstasis. But, you know, a healthy mind is probably your best bet there. And the convulsions, I would say that could be a dosage thing. So if you're thinking of doing 5-MeO, which I'm not recommending, but if you are going to be doing 5-MeO, talk to your facilitator and ask lots of questions. Ask what their style is. Ask how they hold space. You know, do they have an induction form? Are they wanting to know about you? Are they wanting to know what your psychological profile is, what things may come up in the ceremony, what medications you might be on, how your health is? If they're not, they should be, because knowing that in advance can help cater to your individual experience to minimize the risk. And things like convulsions could be a contraindication, I don't know. It could also be a dosage response. So some things that some facilitators can ask are like, well, you know, do you have a strong mind? Do you have a busy mind? Have you done other medicines? What your experience is there? Do you need 3 cups of ayahuasca or 5 cups? Or are you really sensitive? Also, if the dosage response, if they do lower doses to begin with to test your sensitivity. Because if you're really sensitive and you're given 100 milligrams of toad, you're going to get fried. I've had friends that have been fried by other facilitators who experience basically serotonin shock, and for days or weeks afterwards can't sleep, energetically out of sorts, like just wired and fried, and convulsions, you know? So it's a lot of this can be alleviated in the pre-screening and in the curation and the tenderness and the empathy of how you hold that space in the initiation, and then also, so crucially, in the integration, in the follow-up, in the relationship the facilitator owes to the person that they've been in service to follow up and make sure how they're going, make sure they're okay, to provide them integration information, to make sure there's a list of foods or substances that can help ground you if you're feeling unactivated and not grounded, or if, you know, practices like if you're feeling ungrounded and you're reactivating, don't do meditation, you know, because you're going to go more into that space. So there's information out there. The Aware Project, I think it's awareproject.org, I hope, in LA, they've got a list of the conclave's best practices and integration information that's out there. Also, the 5 Hive is another forum that's out there. It's 5meodmt.org, I think, which has information on all these types of aspects as well.
This is a question from the live stream.
How many do you have?
I have 2.
Perfect.
Do you feel there needs to be some sort of structure to help this medicine come through efficiently, like practitioner training specifically, or codes of ethics for practitioners? What would that look like? The second question is suggestions for breathwork practices. And then just following up from that last question, I was wondering about the issue of restraint also, like if physical restraint is ever necessary and at what point that
Were
becomes
these all the live
necessary.
stream questions all in
The
one?
third one was mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to get you to say them again because
Okay.
there's so much to get into there. So just the contain and constrain thing in ceremony. If someone is really, there's this potential for what I call the godgasm, where people's like completely just like spasming like this human animal hit by lightning, right? The idea is in a facilitation role to contain but not constrain. You don't want to create a negative imprint. You do not want to be them in this experience, and at some stage of the experience of the ego dissolving, the mind comes back and people can still be in the white light, in the void, in source consciousness with their mind there and aware of their circumstances and dipping in and out of that consciousness. And you don't want to be holding them down and like putting a rod in their mouth to stop them biting their tongue, whatever. I mean, you want to support the person in expressing, but containing them so they're not going to hurt themselves, hit their head, do damage to themselves, but not creating a fresh negative imprint. So the terminology that's used by practitioners is contain, not constrain. That's your question.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the first one again?
Do you feel that there needs to be some sort of structure to help this medicine come through efficiently?
Yes. And it is a self-organizing structural integral system that is being secreted and manifested and unfolded from source consciousness itself. This is like the Samadhi Mesh Network thing. We're all in service to it, and it's self-organizing. So people are finding each other. There's potentially this like enormously synchronistic, like off the scale synchronistic connection between toad people, where like the first time I did toad, like for the first 6 months, I would cross the street and sit on a bus next to a 90-year-old lady and she'd look at me and she would say toad. I mean, it didn't quite happen. It was just ridiculous. It was like, what I started to realize is everyone and not just from toad, but remember, 5-MeO is endogenous, and that vibration, it's about that vibration, that awareness of source in its vessel looking out at itself, right? And it's like there's some type of cohesion and some type of, like in a neural structure, when we go through different brainwave states, if you look at the species as a container for this consciousness, people that have had this experience, they're still on. And on some frequency level, it feels like we're finding each other and entraining each other because the synchronicities are just off the scale when 5-MeO people meet, right? And it's incredible. So something is coming through. Structure is needed. Structure is really needed. And it's still so new. It's 5 to 10 years old. And most of those 5 or 10 years have been the frontier, the high frontier in the wilderness and the Mexicans. And it's coming into the West, and it's coming into the medical establishment. It's coming into the shamanic communities. It's coming into the communities of the heart. So it feels like there's this system of cycling energy, which I mentioned before, where nature conserves and is never lost. It's just cycling around. And so people come to this experience and they have an individual experience. They may do group work. They may work with a group on a day or a retreat or a weekend. And there's, I call them God pods, right? There's potential for groups in having this experience individually and collectively at the same time to express that energy. And that same collectivism is potentially there in the community of clusters all around the globe that are forming around 5-MeO. Just like they did with ayahuasca communities around the world as they came through and as other medicines are forming. People find the medicine, or the medicine finds them, what they resonate with, what their ally is. 5-MeO is really strong in that. And people are finding each other and structure is forming. It's almost like that brain structure and the galaxy structure we mentioned before. It's a self-organizing structure. Within that, yeah, we mentioned ceremony, the container, the sacredness, the safeness of the space, and yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify to make sure their question gets answered, because they had specific points about practitioner training and codes of ethics.
So that is a hot potato in the global community. There's these best practices the conclave have put out, which are essentially a code of ethics. The issue has been, it's complicated because there's no one way exactly to do this medicine. There's, you know, some people do it inside, some people do it outside, some people do it standing up, most people do it sitting down. The delivery mechanism, the dosages, it doesn't have an established lineage. There's not a right and a wrong, except for the safety and integrity of the individual going through the experience. So there has been documentation created and written that's out there saying very detailedly the diversity of the experience and keeping what the ethical backbone is. People are trying also to boil that down almost to like a 10 commandments of like, here is the top 10 ethical ways to do toad. It's like the unity field. There's always more. I mean, maybe you can boil it down to 10 commandments of toad, right? I don't know, but people have been trying for about 18 months, 2 years online in the different groups, and it's not easy to do so, but there is obviously a need for an ethical approach to the medicine, to the approach of serving, to the approach of the integration, the initiation and the preparation, and to the whole thing. And it is coming. And there are also movements around in the global community for training practitioners. And again, there's no one way. There's multiple ways that are evolving. There's different Mexican practitioners that are training people. That was happening. Dean Jeffries from the Facebook Toad group was working with Hari Fink in Mexico City doing some practitioner information. There's a little bit of political sensitivity around the words of practitioner training because people say, well, who is there to train? There are practitioners, but they're all still new. And even those are like, well, we're conscious in the community not to say that this is like a rubber stamp or the gold stamp to say, here's the practitioner training for 5-MeO DMT. No one has the authority to do that. This is all grassroots sovereignty. Sovereign beings knowing that they are the divine being. That's where the power and the sovereignty comes from. And the checks and balances are from the rest of the community checking and balancing all the facilitators too. So within that, no one wants to say this is the way to train a facilitator, but multiple pathways are evolving slowly and organically, and that is needed as well. Yeah.
And the last question from the live stream is suggestions for breathwork practices.
Pranayama, you want to do this one? I get a confession. I need to learn this stuff. And this is what Toad or 5-MeO has guided me to. I have these peak experiences. And then when I come back and it's like, I want to do more with that integration, and not just integration, but optimization. And Daniel is going to teach me breathwork.
Not right now. But I'm now just having this thought that maybe in 2019 we should have like sitting for psychonauts and breathing for Bufo and things like that.
Yeah.
Preparation practices and coming together and doing the breath work together with these sorts of intentions.
The breath work is great because when you're in the most intense entheogenic experience you'll ever go through, if you have any mind left, come back to breath. Come back to breath and just focus and feel safe and relax and be calm. And so all of these psychedelic experiences, if people do preparation beforehand, like preparing for your entheogenic experience, by doing some meditation work, by doing some breath work, those skills carry over into the experience and after the experience. So preparation in 2019 is awesome. Awesome
Right.
idea.
It's like your muscle memory. You're training your muscle memory. And I just had this thought. You were talking about the different sheaths of the body that we inhabit as the temple. There's they're called the koshas, right? And there's the physical body, and then there's the prana body, which is also the breath body, and then there's the mental body. And so we see that the breath is the link between the physical and the mental. And so if your mind is disturbed, see what's happening with your breathing. Is your breathing disturbed? And there's ways to, just by simply smoothing it out with an even inhale and exhale, being conscious about the pauses between them, just watching the breath, it will teach you. I mean, it's also a master teacher. It's your own breath. Last question.
Hi, thank you so much. Talk a lot about the relationship as if, like, of course, it's a continual process. And I wanted to know if you have feedback or an opinion on, of course, it's different for everyone, but in your experience, if there is a sort of too many times that one can do toad, and I would also like to know, because I have a feeling you probably say no, there's not, perhaps an appropriate frequency. Like, is there a frequency which is too frequent?
I don't know. I mean, I would ask people like why they were going back. Like, don't chase it. Like it's the first time I did 5-MeO was 2006. I didn't do 5-MeO again until 2015. That was partially because I was integrating and I was putting it into the book and the film, and it was just so big. And at the time, there was no community, and it was like, what to do with it? It's like a once in a lifetime +4 in the Shogun scale experience. Now there is a community, and it feels to me there's a movement, and there's something happening with 5-MeO that's activating this Samadhi Mesh network. It doesn't have to continue to happen from an external catalyst like toad or synthetic, but it seems to be that the opportunity in that invitation to open is very dynamic from the catalyst of the medicines. There's also that relationship, and I believe that as we just described, that with breath work and meditation and even neurofeedback, that we can create a program that optimizes the onness once we've had the opening of the galactivation. And then we don't necessarily need the external catalyst because we are the medicine, right? That's what it really reveals. It's within us all along. So we don't need the external thing all the time, but at the moment, it appears to be like cultural training wheels to remember the divine within. Within that, I'm also discovering potentials, right? So the traditional 5-MeO experience of expansion into the divine, into source, and the drop becoming the ocean is the first steps. Lately, when I'm experiencing medicine in countries where it is legal, I feel that the 5-MeO experience stretches me to the entire awareness of the space-time continuum of like that edge. It's like to the ocean. It's like my drop expands out to the ocean, and then the ocean comes into my drop consciously. And I'm wondering whether that muscle memory we described before, that it feels like the point isn't just to go to stage 5 samadhi all the time. The point or the potential is to anchor stage 5 samadhi into the human experience. And they say this in the Yoga Sutras, and there's a very beautiful treatise written called the Toad Palace Protocols that my friend Richard King created, that you can see hear about on my podcast, In a Perfect World. And he's suggesting that essentially the sutras in the Yoga Sutras is the weaving, but it's the weaving from stage 4 samadhi to stage 5, that you go in with an intention. So we're not just going in randomly, we're going in to do something, and that something is to bring our intention into the space and to let go from stage 4 to stage 5 and then come back. And in coming back, it creates this loop or this weaving that anchors that divine energy into the human vessel. And by doing repeated incursions into the divine and coming back, we're bringing more ocean back with us. And I feel that could be the potential human-divine integration, that at this stage in the awakening of the world ages and the potential golden age around the corner coming back full circle, that by going into the divine and coming back, we're anchoring it, and it can then express and see through its creation, and that is sort of how that golden age comes to fruition. So there is potential to go back multiple times, but not recreationally, in a sort of God-naught way, you know, going in with a purpose to serve the divine purpose. And I don't know, maybe that's my ego, maybe that's my story, but I think it's worth giving it a shot.
So, how do people find you?
I'm here.
How do people find you
Behind the couch.
when you're not behind the couch?
You can find me on rakrazam.com, and that has links to my other websites, Shamans of the Global Village, which please check out that film. It's a very powerful film about 5-Meo Dmt and the practitioner in the film who uses it. There's also the website aya-awakenings.com, which is both a book and a film, which the film aya-awakenings.com has a 20-minute 5-Meo sequence, which is pretty freaking out there, and wasn't intended, but is it's out there in the cultural record to help transmit that energy. And yeah, I live here in San Francisco now, so I'm part of the community, and please reach out. I would love to meet the others and realize that there are no others.
Well, I certainly appreciate you coming. I really enjoyed it. I feel like did you guys enjoy?
Could I do a plug?
What's that?
Could I do a little plug?
Oh, yeah, you keep plugging.
So for all San Francisco people that are here or watching, my dear friend Joel Briere is doing a talk, a Samadhi Satsang on Wednesday, the 7th